to begin a story. A man was walking in the woods. As he walked, the sky slowly got darker. Cold and tired, he came to an open door. On the other side of this door, it was as bright as day. It appeared that there was some sort of celebration that was happening in a field with a large banquet and much merriment. But just before he passed through, he looked up above the door. On it was inscribed a single word: believe. The man sighed. Believe? Oh, those people believe. I do not belong here. He thought himself wise as he walked away into the cold and the dark. It came to pass that another person stumbled upon this open door. She looked up at the sign that read believe, and she took it as a warning. God wants me to believe, she said. I better trust that he will show me a way out of this woods. So she turned around and walked into the cold and the dark. A child came to the door. Darkness had again settled over this wood. It was cold and he was hungry. The child looked briefly at the sign above the door and then passed through. The guests on the other side welcomed him and fed him, asking only, "How did you pass? So many look through, but do not come in." The child said simply, "That door was open." So ends the story. Now, I cannot remember a Christmas season without the anxiety that the meaning of the holiday will be forgotten. I honestly have not seen anything about it yet, but we all know what's coming. It's the inevitable story of how the meaning of the season will be compromised by failures to say the right words and perform the right actions. Somebody in a recent year called it the Christmas wars industry, arguing that there is money to be made in this fight. Bumper stickers are sold that say, "Remember the reason for the season." Signs that read "Happy Holidays" or "Season's Greetings" instead of "Merry Christmas" are criticized on certain networks that sell commercials in order to get people to watch them. And then, of course, there's a controversy about the color of the cups at Starbucks in a recent year, prompting people to go to other coffee shops. One of the traits that I admire about Jesus as he's portrayed in the Gospels is his ability to jettison both concerns over cultural practices as well as ostentatious displays of piety. He healed people on the Sabbath while also criticizing the hypocritical religious displays of his peers. So I have something of a feeling that while he may criticize the frantic consumerism of the season were he alive today, which has, of course, become part of an American cultural tradition, this sort of frantic consumerism, I think that he would not have cared much about the pietistic anxiety over the sign at Macy's and whether it says "Season's Greetings" or "Merry Christmas." I would like to imagine that from Jesus there's some kind of kindness or wisdom or depth that he might call people to at this time of year, one apart from either the consumerism or the so-called war on Christmas. And yet these concerns have become a cultural phenomenon, as predictable as the turning of the season or the ticking of the clock. The comedian Ben Stein circulated an email that was not comedic at all in a recent year, where he took up this culture war. Now, Ben Stein is a Jewish person, but he wants people to reclaim the religious language of the season. He's troubled that people are not putting their faith on display. In his article, he suggests that Hurricane Katrina happened because we stopped saying prayer in school. He quotes Billy Graham's daughter on this. For years, we've been telling God to get out of our schools, to get out of our government, to get out of our holidays, and to get out of our lives. And being the gentleman that he is, I believe that God has calmly backed out. This is a talismanic way of thinking about religion and thinking about God. It's the same idea as if we were to wear a lucky red sweater to a sports game, hoping that our team will win. It says if we just recite the right words in the right places, if we all just believe, God will do favors for us. Now, the religious thinkers and holy people that I admire the most know that belief entails no inevitable reward, nor is the holy so neatly containable. It is so much more complicated. Several years ago, a controversy erupted over the writings of Mother Teresa. She prayed and labored among the poor in Calcutta, seeing daily the orphaned children, the children who were dying from curable diseases, the children who were dying from starvation, from hunger. And yet, as the diaries published after her death explain, she lost her belief in God again and again. In my soul, I feel just that terrible pain of loss, she writes, of God not wanting me, of God not being God, of God not existing. This was not because she refused to say Merry Christmas or pray in the school at which she worked. Rather, she lost faith because she believed in more, and yet the suffering never ceased. Suffering never ceased. I find no words, Mother Teresa writes, to express the depths of my darkness. Easy piety and sure belief pale in comparison to the authenticity of her struggle. And yet there is still this cultural expectation that piety and belief will provide the path, the password, the key. I have a feeling, and I've had it for a long time, that they won't provide us with those things, and they will instead leave us in the cold and the dark. In Catherine Keller's book on the mystery, she explores a biblical story from the book of Judges. Here, fugitives from Ephraim would attempt to cross a river. The men of Gilead ask, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When they say no, the men at the river ask the fugitive to say the word Shibboleth. The Ephraimite would say Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. They would then seize the fugitive and kill him, dumping his body into the river. The book of Judges reports that 42,000 people were slaughtered in that way. The Shibboleth is the password, the word of exclusion, the word that affirms or denies entry. We have plenty of them in our culture. The liberal religious minister Davidson Lohr writes that belief in God has degenerated into little more than this, a shibboleth, asking whether you belong or not. It has become as meaningless as asking, there is a giant thing in the sky called God. Check yes or no. God is real. Check yes or no. This communicates little of any substance about a theological conviction, but it says a lot about where you will be permitted to go in society and who you'll be permitted to be around in society. If you believe in that big thing in the sky, then you're invited to certain clubs. If you do not, then you're perceived to be the enemy, or at the very least, someone who is misguided. It is the same for those who do not believe in the big thing in the sky. When I was in college, my philosophy professors made it crystal clear that belief in God was an embarrassment at best. If you wanted admittance into serious academia, your answer to the thing in the sky question had to be no, or at least you had to keep it very quiet. Believing and not believing are convenient boxes for understanding and dividing up our world. We Unitarian Universalists are not immune to doing that either. In fact, a lot of our history over the past century has been about fighting over that big thing in the sky question. Some have said that it does not exist, others that it does. And congregations and even entire regions have been torn apart over the issue. Self-righteousness, when it comes to believing or not, is particularly nauseous. There are competing ideas that if we just stop believing, or if we just believe a little bit more, then all will be well for us. Catherine Keller's book is called On the Mystery because she claims there is a mystery in all of this that's available to us if we allow it. If we allow for a bit more complexity, then it matters little which box we decide to check off. Instead of shutting us down, our questions can open us up, leaving us with a greater width in which to encounter life. When belief forces us into simplistic solutions, the check yes or no version of theology, then our lives become narrower. Our world shrinks. When our answers to these deeper questions of life become frozen into neat formulas, crystallized into simplistic shibboleths, we have glimpsed the realm of the possible and chosen to shut ourselves out in the cold and the dark. This notion of mystery should not be confused with saying that our ignorance proves the existence of God, which some people have tried to put forward. That is a distortion that leads us back to belief and ultimately, I think, is not helpful. Now, some may be familiar with this argument. It goes kind of like this. When science cannot explain something, that gap is attributable to God. On the surface, it may seem that this view of God presents an opening beyond believing because its foundation is precisely in what we do not know. But as the professor of biology, Chet Ramo, points out, this God of the gaps, this God that is rooted in our unknowing, limits in the same way that other beliefs do. In other words, this view contains its own insistence on certainty. When we can say that we know this much and only this much, we have then created a neat box in which to place the holy, which is outside of that. And this view of God is not without its own problems. As Ramo writes in his wonderful book, When God is Gone, Everything is Holy, gaps have a curious way of being filled. Ultimately, this view of God is reliable, for I would hate to think that my own faith depended on scientists never figuring out how the blood-clotting protein cascade evolved, or how the flagellum of a bacterium evolved, to mention just two of the so-called irreducibly complex aspects of life that are sometimes offered as evidence for God's design. This view of God, this God of the gaps, is not the same thing as mystery, as this opening into mystery that I want to describe. Mystery is bigger than this. It is an opening or an appreciation for the grandeur of this universe in which we find ourselves. As Ramo put it, one doesn't have to be a Lord Kelvin or an Einstein to find a place to enter. A leaf of grass will provide ingress into infinity. The ancients believed that the stars were pinholes in the dome of the sky through which shone the light of an outer, more wonderful world. And it is true. Every star is a rabbit hole into another world. In the course of a lifetime of starry nights, I could not possibly explore them all. He continues just a little bit longer. So I lie on my back, and the light of 10,000 stars enters my eyes. 10,000 subtle but distant wavelets of energy enter my eyes at slightly different angles from out of the depths of space, and by some miracle, my eyes and brain sort it all out, put each star in its proper place, recognize the familiar patterns of the constellations, and open my soul to a universe whose length and breadth exceed my wildest imagining. Starlight falls upon me like gentle rain. It blows across me like a furious wind. I am soaked and shaken. Rameau's understanding opens us to a greater width, a broader appreciation of life, a sense of awe and wonder and mystery. How much more beautiful, how much more complex than that talismanic certainty of belief, that rigidity that is claimed by so many in our culture. Rameau's is a mystery that is also an invitation, a welcome into an experience of grandeur. It's a doorway, an opening to a feast of appreciation for the holy that leaves behind insistencies, beliefs, and certainties. There is a famous quotation from the Sufi poet Rumi that I'd like to repeat here. It's about good and evil, but I think it applies equally to believing and not believing. Rumi says, "Beyond good and evil, there is a field. Meet me there." I invite us to imagine, beyond believing and not believing, there is a field. Meet me there. My revision of Rumi's saying does not imply that believing is irrelevant. It does matter what we believe and also what we do not believe. But when we box our world into those who believe and those who do not, we miss the possibility that something could exist beyond our fragile human certainty. We miss something bigger, something that could open us to a greater appreciation for life and for the universe. And that, I think, is a terrible loss. I'm not exactly sure what that beyond would look like. I just have a few scattered images and ideas. A dome of night with 10,000 stars, a blade of grass that invites an ingress into infinity, a saint who doubted, a saint who admitted her uncertainty of belief, but that there were times that she could not see the holy and yet continued to do the work that she was called to do. The idea of mystery, the question mark, the open ending, the doorway. The doorway. The doorway out of the cold and the dark. My friends, that door is open. Amen. I love you, and blessed be.